We are full speed ahead, focusing on launching our Murfreesboro location for our cleaning company right now. I just had this gut feeling that this is going to be a problem because now we're going to hyper focus on this location, needing it to be perfect before we feel good about going to the next location. As we've started to expand, it's a problem because we're going to need to add team members. Well, that comes from systems. When you have people, process, and tech come together, that is what creates the continuity. I had to take a hard look at that and say, I need to develop this out. What's up? Welcome back. Oh man, it has been a couple weeks since I've provided an update here. So what have I been up to? We are full speed ahead, focusing on launching our Murfreesboro location for our cleaning company right now. And here's the coolest thing about that, and I didn't anticipate this. There are a lot of things in a business that when you're building it, we sort of have this like checklist mentality, right? So, we've got to build out our SOPs and we got to document them and we got to have the right people in the right place. And then we start thinking through like, what does continuity look like? And what happens if somebody just decides not to show up to work like one day? Who's going to do their job? And how's that person going to get replaced? And like, we started thinking through all these things and we build this like big, massive checklist. And initially we started to do that with the current location here in Clarksville, anticipating opening up the next location. And as we started to do that, I became like fascinated with what was happening with everybody and where our focus sort of turned to. And I just had this, I guess, gut feeling that like this is going to be a problem because now we're going to hyper focus on this location, and then we might eventually get to the point where we're like needing it to be perfect before we feel good about going to the next location. Now, that being said, there is some merit, and I do see there's some merit in this idea of having one solid location before you go to the next. I see a lot of influencers and other entrepreneurs, business people out there that are like, you're spreading yourself too thin, and you built this location and then you decide to go for the low-hanging fruit of expanding to the next location, and you spread yourself too thin and then it all came apart. And really you should have kept going deep, right? You want depth versus breadth. Like I said, there is merit in that idea, and there are a lot of valid points that come with that. That being said, I think self-awareness and knowing yourself and your team comes into play here. And for what I saw is we tend to be in a better place than we give ourselves credit for, and be further developed than we give ourselves credit for. So, I naturally lean more on the perfection versus the action, right? So just know yourself. And so I said, I'm going to go with my gut. We need to keep pushing forward. And there are some things that we need to develop out before we launch this next location, but let's not let everything hinge on that. And let's focus on getting this thing like planted and going. And I'm glad I've done so, because what we've realized through this process is there are a lot of things that we didn't know that needed to be created, addressed, or fixed, or people in places, or whatever the case is. But there are also a lot of things that have come up along the way that we didn't anticipate. And as we've gone through that process, the process of setting up the next location, it's forced us to address some of these things head on. So what I've been working on recently in the past week are our sales processes. Just to give you a little bit of context here, up to this point, our sales had primarily been handled by Shelby. She's the face of this company. And if you know home service companies, the way sales are done are a little different than like real estate or auto sales. It's different. So Shelby has a lot of deep relationships, and people get to know her, and we have good marketing. And so the sales process has been not as structured, and for the most part has resided within our heads, wasn't really documented. And then when we brought somebody else in initially for like a sales representative role, we started to see some issues where it was like, a lot of the process is in our head. We need to get it out and get it documented. And then we sort of tweaked the process. We said, maybe we don't need a sales representative. We actually need like customer support, because when somebody calls you in a home service company, they're calling you for a reason, because they need a specific thing done. And it's not so much focused on whether they're going to make that decision for themselves or not. Like, they're going to make the decision. It's just a matter of, are they going to purchase that service from you or somebody else? And so again, it's slightly different than what I I've experienced in other industries. So that being said, the way that we had handled this was we just kind of played it fast and loose. We're like, let it become a problem when it becomes a problem. And as we've started to expand, now at this point, we're like, oh, it's a problem because we're going to need to add team members. As we're trying to do that, how do we get these team members up to speed, get them onboarded, get them trained, and then get them consistently all doing the same thing, working together? Well, that comes from systems. When you have people, process, and tech come together, that is what creates the continuity. That's what gets you the desired result. And so I had to take a hard look at that and say, okay, I need to develop this out. I spend a lot of time doing is taking a look at the things we're doing that work, and then putting them into a system, and then working with the team to get it documented and developed into an SOP, and then we test it out. And then if it doesn't quite work, we tweak it, and then we just kind of adjust from there. And if we get to the point where we're questioning, like, does this even need to exist? And we might scrap it and move on. That's sort of rhythm that we follow. So I identified, hey, I need to look at our sales, for lack of a better term, sales system. So what do I mean when I'm talking about that? Well, in the most basic sense, we know that a business system really has three components, right? It has people, has process, and it has tech. Everything I've done thus far has operated from this lens. So I'm saying that from my own personal experience. Everything that I've built in a business, from offering cleaning services to purchasing houses, renovating them, selling consultant services, like whatever, every time I built a system around that, it's involved people, process, and tech. And so the people are the ones involved. A process is just step-by-step action to get a thing done. And tech is like the tools, the software that we have in this day and age to move things along, and sometimes to automate processes and completely remove people. A point we try to get to in a lot of the things we do, especially like the really heavy admin things, because it's my belief I want people doing the high leverage things, like the thinking things, relationship things, because that's where they're the most valuable. At least at this point, I can't really replace that with tech, but like the button pushing, the document moving, sliding, and clicking, and like all that stuff, like we can automate that. We don't need people doing that stuff. How did I go about this? Just to kind of clue you into what I've been doing. So the first thing I did was I went and started taking an inventory of what it was that I wanted to do. So I said, okay, when I say sales system, what do I mean? Like what's the whole point, right? And there has to be a split between marketing and sales. If marketing brings in a lead, somebody that's interested in purchasing cleaning services from us, I need to send them somewhere, right? And so that was really the first point. So no matter where a lead comes in, we have all leads funneling into one central location. Like we're just trying to get them into one central location, and that is a tool, tech, system we use here. We get all leads coming in here, and this is where we start the sales system. Lead comes in, then what needs to happen? Like, what are we trying to do? We're trying to interact with them, give them any information they need, understand. They come to us with a problem, understand if we're the solution for their problem, and then get them set up with those services, get them on the schedule. And I started like just filling in all these details and just going through it chronologically in like order of events that need to happen. They need to fill out a form, and then they need to potentially get a quote. They need to understand scope. We need to get them onboarded, get payment saved. We need to get them on the schedule, then get the teams out there, and then they need to get service, collect payment, a bunch of different things that need to happen. But safe to say, I just took an inventory of everything. And this is a pattern that follows in just the way that I operate, even on the day-to-day when I'm trying to decide what to do. So I'm comfortable with it. I don't know if it's the best way. It's just a way, and it works for me. I took the inventory, and then I started to map it out. So I said, okay, this needs to happen. And I just took a blank sheet of paper, or I used this fancy little tool on my iPad called Freeform, where I can just draw. I just write all this stuff out, and then I start to connect the dots. And so this is where I start to involve the people in the process. I say, okay, what key people are involved? We have what we call our customer experience coordinator. They're involved. We have the customer that's involved. We have an administrative virtual assistant that's involved. And I started plotting those people. And I said, okay, what are the actions that need to happen? And then what are the steps of those actions? And this is where processes start to get created. Once I laid all that out, then I said, okay, what tech do I have available that we use? Well, our central system, you might know it as a CRM. Ours is called a FSM, a field service management tool. We use a communication software called Slack. We use Zapier to make integrations and connect things on the back end. So I plotted those things out, and then I started to connect the dots, and it looked something like, okay, lead goes to website, they fill out a form, a notification goes to our Slack channel, which notifies everybody that needs to be aware that this is happening. So the admin virtual assistant and the customer experience coordinator, right? I also have some sort of oversight because I can see that in the Slack channel so that I can actually see if something got missed or didn't get missed. This is a part of management here. And then once the request comes in, we need to respond to them. The customer needs to feel that communication, right? And so how's that going to happen? Is there going to be a phone call? And if there's a phone call, who's going to take that phone call? And I started working through all of this. And this, like I said, is what I've been working on for the past week. So this isn't something that happens in 30 minutes or an hour. This is something you got to spend some time in. Now, as I started working through all of this, other things started coming up. One of them was, oh my gosh, do we have a sales process in terms of what the customer experience coordinator is saying to the customer and how they're taking that customer through the phone call, right? In the most simple sense, that's what, when we hear the term sales process, that's what we're talking about. And it's not just the phone call. Sometimes there is a phone call involved. Sometimes there's multiple phone calls involved. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes there's a lot of automation on the front end. Either way, when we talk about like a sales process, that's what I've seen people refer to. And so that's what I'm referring to here. So I said, oh my gosh, how am I going to document this sales process? How am I going to make sure that not just for this location, but all the other locations that this customer experience coordinator is covering for, they're having the same type of conversation, same structure, they're all leading to the same thing. And as we bring another person on to cover down on other locations, how do I get that person on the same page? And it just, as I started thinking through that, it became clear to me. I was like, oh, we need a sales script. So then I developed our 5-step sales framework. That in and of itself took me a couple days. I had to iterate on it. We had to test it out. And when we develop something like this, and this goes for marketing and sales, operations too, when we're trying to convert somebody, I test these things out. I don't just assume they're going to work. Sounded good. I thought it was a good idea. It's a framework that I've used in my real estate company. It's a framework that I've used in other sales. It comes from Jeremy Miner. So shout out to my friend Lindsay, who I had been following Jeremy Miner. I was kind of aware of who he was. And then she did some training with him. And then she shared some of that training with me in real estate. And I saw the power of it. And so then I just doubled down on it. I've used a lot of his stuff and his philosophies to develop ours. And so far it works pretty well. We were able to convert fairly high, and we still convert fairly high. Only now it's, not Shelby doing it. It's somebody else that we've hired, trained, and got them onboarded. So for us, that was a win. And so when I developed that, I just followed the same process that I talked to you about on the sales system in terms of what needs to be done and then what are the steps to do it. So we have the customer experience coordinator. Once they receive the customer's information, they're going to be the one walking through that sales process. And I just broke it down. I'll share that with you here because I think it's really powerful. It might help you out as well. But it's, again, this is the same sort of framework that I followed, speaking from principles, for really everything I've sold. Really, it starts with upfront. We want to connect with the customer, and I want to make sure that I'm clear on this. This isn't like building rapport, and I say that kind of laughing because in the military we have like a similar framework, but this whole build rapport when you meet somebody, especially in a foreign force, right? And it's just gets bastardized, for lack of a better term, in sales. And so I want to be very clear here. Well, we say connect because what we want is a genuine connection. We don't want to talk about the weather or just haphazardly mention their kids or their family, or try to overreach and draw one of the funny ones is draw similarity with them and oh, you like dirt bikes? I like dirt bikes too. I've been riding, people see through that and it just feels kind of weird. So we want to genuinely connect. Let's be real here. If a customer calls you or you're calling them because they filled out a form, they've already showed intent and they have a problem. They're calling to see if you have the solution to their problem. And so it's okay to be direct and to the point and like, let's address that. You don't have to like sugarcoat that. Now, that being said, we're human beings and like we want to genuinely connect. Just being normal and having a conversation with them is a part of our process. And so for us, it's just opening up by acknowledging what it is they sent and asking them genuine questions and being curious. There's a powerful thing that happens when you do that with a customer. A connection starts to build because they feel like, wow, this person's asking good questions. They are interested. They are acknowledging certain things about my life. And so that's really how we start the conversation. Now, once we start to get that conversation going, there are other things that are happening. Like, for instance, we're trying to understand who this person is. Is this somebody that is calling us because they want a garage cleaned? Because we don't clean garages in our cleaning company, so we would want to know that, and we'd want them to know that sooner than later. Is this a person that's calling looking for somebody to come and clean their house on a recurring basis? Okay, well now this is perfect because that is the thing that we do exceptionally well. So we probably can help solve this person's problem better than anybody else. So we're starting to find these things out as we're asking these questions, right? So that's really the first step. We say connect, and for us in our framework, we say connect and learn. And then the second thing is, again, they called us because they have a problem. They think we have the solution to that problem. So the next logical step for us is identify their problem. Like, what is their problem? For our cleaning company, there are several different situations that people are in as to why they would call us. They might be struggling to keep up with their house and they need somebody to do it for them and sort of automate the process and stay on it consistently. They might be looking to sell a house and they need that thing in like tip-top shape as soon as possible because the buyers are going to do a walkthrough or what. There's all different types of situations. But the second step is where we start to identify that. And the third step is going to be to identify the solution. Okay, well, we have a problem. Well, what's the solution? And so through this part of our framework, we start to talk through how we could potentially put that problem to rest for them, like what that might look like. And again, this is coming through talking to the customer and ask them questions. We don't want to make assumptions. We don't just want to say, oh, your problem is you need cleaning services. We have cleaning services. We're the solution. It's not as simple as that. I mean, it can be. And if you want it to be, then there's probably going to be some that you're leaving on the table. But if we go a little bit deeper, we ask better questions, it helps in the long run. And we make sure that we're meeting expectations as well. So that is our third step to work through the solution. And then the fourth step is what happens like in preparation of making a decision. What happens like if you don't find the solution to the problem? Like, what is the consequence is what we call it. It's really powerful to have this in a framework because we're really thinking through the entirety of that customer's journey with us. So they come to meet us because they think we have a solution to their problem. We're working through identifying if we do or we don't. We decide we do. We give them the potential options. And then it's really at this point where they're going to go one of two ways. They're going to make a decision to say yes. They're going to make a decision to say no. In preparation for that to happen, what are the consequences of saying yes or no? Like, let's start to work through those. That would be step 4. And then the final step is the most obvious step. Most companies will refer to this as the close. For us, it's just make a decision. That customer is going to make a decision one way or another. They're going to say yes or no. Our job, the customer experience coordinator's job, is to walk them through this and help them make the best decision for themselves. And if our marketing's on point and we're having good quality conversations, we are attracting the right people that we can help. So the obvious answer is to go with us because we're going to help them. If it's not so much that is the case and our marketing's off, it probably isn't the right person and they probably need to come to a no conclusion. So we don't waste their time and they're not wasting our time and taking up calendar space as well. So that's really how we think about that 5-step sales process. And that is what I took a lot of time developing to get very specific with it. I scripted it out. So I said, generally, what can a customer experience coordinator say throughout each one of these steps. And this is not for them to sound like a robot on the phone. They don't sound like a robot on the phone reading a script. This is for them to train on, to commit to memory, so they understand and they can anticipate some of the way that this conversation ought to go. And in it, I developed some decision points to help them. Well, if the customer decides to go this way, then we can guide them this way. If the customer decides to go that way, then we can sort of guide them that way, and so on and so forth. And at the end of it, we produced a pretty sweet script. We've tested it, we've iterated it. It seems to be working well, and it's something now tangible, documented, that we can take somebody else. We put them through our hiring process, which involves some screening. And so if they make it through all that, we've determined that they're a fit for the job, they're a fit for our company, they have that capability and ability. And so then we just give them the onboarding and training. And as long as they commit to that and they show us that they are who they said they are previously, and they get through it, now they're fully capable of operating. And now we have multiple people doing the same thing with the same sort of principles. What a customer can experience from the Clarksville location versus the Murfreesboro location is now the same. On the back end, things look the same, and now we're actually building something. That's something that I had a lot of fun doing, was super proud of in the end, and brought value to the company as something like long-term too, because before there was just a gap there. It was all in our heads. Now we have it all developed out. It's something that we can iterate on. Like now we have the foundation, we just build on it over and over and over again. And the cool thing is now that I've been through that process, like I could develop it for a very similar type of business. I could develop it for, similar types of things, and I already have like a hard shell. It's tested to an extent. I know it works. A lot of benefit came from that. Now, the last thing I'll say is I had mentioned the process map. So why did I map all this stuff out and start to get a visual of it? For me, I'm a very visual person, and it helps me work through what it is I'm trying to accomplish, and then also make sure that I'm omitting things that are too much. Things tend to get very complex with me. So if I can see it and I can see like how dense the thing is that I'm looking at really is, I can start to like omit things that probably aren't providing as much value as I think they are. And then that tends to lead to, then I can figure out, okay, if it involves people, what does management of the process look like? Like, where's the accountability? Who's overseeing to make sure when we start at A, we end at Z, and all the people in between are doing the things that they need to do? Because let's be real here, leadership is involved in a business at every single level, and management of process as well. Those are things that we need to think about, and I get to have a picture of how I can develop that. And then also when I'm building automation, so if I'm like, okay, this customer is going to take this action, and then this person in this role is going to take this action. Okay, how is the person in the role going to know that the customer took the action? We need maybe a notification. Okay, can I create in a system a trigger for a notification? That's how I think through that stuff. I need to, because if I don't, how is the person doing the job ever supposed to know that the customer's accomplished the thing to move them to the next step? So I get to work through all of that stuff when it's like mapped out and I see it. Especially something as complex as like a sales system, right? Because like I said, sales system, even within this video, I covered one piece that was quite a bit in depth, and that was just the sales process, the sales script, right? But there were other things that I developed, the way things get notified, the way jobs get created and input into our scheduling system. Mind you, I didn't even talk about the full sales process where we convert a customer, we go out and we service them, but then that's not the end of the sales process, because immediately after we service them, we want to check in and make sure that we exceeded their expectations. And if we didn't, we honor our promise within our company to make sure that we make every effort to do so. So there's that part. And then there's asking them for a review at some point, right? There's asking them who else they know that we could provide services to and enrich their lives like we've enriched that customer's life. It is a larger process, and I didn't cover down on all those, but the only way I get the visibility, like again, is to map it out and start breaking things down and working through them individually. The final part is, with all this, we have to make sure that we're documenting things. We can't just create things and stuff them away and put them in a system or keep them in our heads or have have this mapped out drawing, like it's sort of useless there. We have to document it, and then we have to familiarize everybody with the document and make sure that we're executing in accordance with that document. And if we're not, we just ask ourselves, why? Is the document not as good as we think it is? We need to adjust it? Or do we just not have accountability so that people actually follow it? Or do we need more training? Like, there's several potential answers to that question, and that's how we work through it. All right, well, that's all I have for this video. Hopefully that's been valuable to you and give you a little more thought about your sales system and any processes that you have that are involved in your business. Until next time, we'll see you.